I Hate Politics is a podcast about a human activity we love to hate. I'm Sunil Dasgupta. If there is something we hate more than politics, it is likely the HOA and the condo board. Neighborhood busybodies policing the height of grass in your yard, the color of your front door, making exceptions for their own properties but nitpicking on others. But like politics, if you live in a homeowners or condo association, you are never exempt, even when you don't want to participate. HOAs, and I include condo associations in the same category, are the lowest level of local government, and they have been a preferred method of neighborhood organization for over 50 years. First, they were used to stop blacks and minorities from moving into white neighborhoods. Then they were used to pick up some municipal functions, street and street light maintenance, managing community facilities like swimming pools and clubhouses, sometimes even garbage collection. Condo associations have particularly proliferated as housing cost and density have increased. And as HOAs and condo associations have become ubiquitous, so have abuses. A few years ago, the Maryland General Assembly had to pass a law to allow homeowners the right to plant native plants in their own yards, overriding HOA rules that required manicured lawns as if front yards were golf courses. This year, the state legislature passed a new law requiring independent third-party conduct of HOA elections and gave new authority to the state attorney general to police HOAs. As a reminder, when I say HOA in the rest of the episode, include condo associations as well. The city of Gaithersburg, where roughly half the population lives in HOA-controlled properties, has decided to exit Montgomery County's HOA governance and dispute resolution body called the Commission on Common Ownership Communities, or CCOC. Gaithersburg, which had long not been a part of CCOC, had joined the mechanism 2 years ago, but is now leaving, disenchanted with the county commission's performance. To dive into HOA and condo issues, I talked with two Gaithersburg City Council members, Neil Harris and Jamil Hernandez, who have also had long service on HOA and condo boards. Stay with us.
I Hate Politics is brought to you by UMBC's Political Science Program, where you'll learn to shape public policy, impact communities, and function at the center of modern society. Learn more at shadygrove.umbc.edu.
I got all the rest of my life figure out what I didn't get right. I got all the rest of my days to figure out how I let you slip away. Take me back to the nights that
I Hate Politics is a podcast about our neighborhoods, workplaces, schools and streets, and our local governments as they function in diverse and democratic societies. This means our politics are messy, dirty, sometimes corrupt, with often self-serving politicians. But no matter how much we may hate politics, we are never exempt from it, even when we refuse to participate. In fact, the purpose of politics is to keep society functioning, precisely when we don't agree with each other, like now. We celebrate new music for the summer, and this is Silver Spring's own power pop band, the Airport 77s. Andy Sullivan on guitar, John Kelly on drums, and Cal Everett, famously of the band 4 out of 5 Doctors, on the bass. The songs we play come from their brand new album, Don't Let Go. You can find the Airport 77s at airport77s.com and at live concerts all over the DC region.
pop radio, baby, one more time. Take me back before it all fell apart, before you broke my heart. Take me back to 1999. We thought it would last forever, but
Neil Harris, Jamil Hernandez, welcome to I Hate Politics.
Gaithersburg is in the house.
We show up in force.
Always happy to have Gaithersburg on the show. Senator Cheryl Kagan recently got a bill passed in the Assembly that brings reform to the HOA Act. What are the changes that she has proposed?
Senate Bill 758 of 2025 was designed to tighten up the regulations to make sure that elections are held fairly, that an independent body can supervise elections, requires that financial statements be made freely available to the members, and adding some enforcement ability for the Attorney General's office.
How is enforcement made more effective?
She expanded the authority of the Division of Consumer Protection at the Attorney General's office.
The Attorney General is swamped. Do you think that's the best place for enforcing HOA infractions?
The challenge is that HOAs and condo associations are chartered by the state of Maryland. So even though if there's an issue, they come to their local government like the city of Gaithersburg, we don't have the authority to enforce it. So we're looking at how we can develop some enforcement mechanisms. I actually just came up with an idea of a plan that I shared with the city staff this week to see if we can do something that helps enforce it.
And what is the concept?
Under the county's enforcement mechanism, where all the condo associations and homeowners associations have to join and pay a monthly fee, my concept was that the monthly fee that they pay would be reduced by demonstration of compliance with various articles of the code. So in other words, if you were paying a $7 a unit fee, it might be $6 if you submit financial statements, and might go down to $5 if you submit a reserve study and so forth. Under the Commission on Common Ownership Communities, which we will refer to as the CCOC, each condo and homeowners association was subject to a fee, currently I believe $7 per unit per year. And that fee entitled them to training for their boards in proper procedures, and also the access to people who could adjudicate any disputes, non-binding arbitration, basically. We found it to be fairly ineffective. The city of Gaithersburg had opted in because it was our option of whether or not to participate. We spent about 2 years as opted into this program and have since opted out.
What is opt-in, what an opt-out mean? I mean, do you have to sign some proclamation or something?
We have to pass an ordinance to accept that we are covered under the particular statute at the county level.
When did you join?
2 years ago, 2023, 2022, middle of 2022, it became effective, and 2 years later.
And now you have an ordinance that takes you out of the county commission on community ownership communities?
Yes, we passed that a month or two ago.
Wow. So in 2 years, Gaithersburg got tired of the county?
Yeah, I would say a few things, Sunil. So when the original idea came for the CCOC opting into adopting the county's, process, there was a thought that if the city was to do it itself, it would be overwhelmed with the number of items it would have to adjudicate. It may not have the expertise. And here was the standalone system that had been up and running for several years in the county. Why not just opt in? At the time, I was not in the council, and I remember writing testimony in opposition in that I believe more in home rule and being more close and accountable to folks that elected you. 2 years later, what we found out was, number one, it wasn't as many kind of cases that went before it. So we got a better handle in terms of what could be. And the cases that went before it, we heard from our residents a lot of concerns in terms of, I think the number one concern was it took a long time for the CCOC to review the procedures and merits of their complaints, only to dismiss them for lack of jurisdiction. And so people would end up having to either go to court anyway, but wasted months and months and months in procedures and hearings and back and forth, only for the CCOC to determine it didn't have jurisdiction. So that, and then a bunch of other, items that we deliberated, said, okay, let's opt out. And we wanted to make sure we opted out before the next set of fees hit, which is now. That's why we opted out when we did. So our common ownership communities in the city would not be burdened with that tax if we were going to opt out a month later anyway. And then what are we going to fashion? So that's what we're in the process now. And, you heard from Neil some ideas there. From a principal standpoint, whatever we come up with, we want to make sure it addresses the main issues that we heard and that we've seen in terms of speed, review. There's training resources for board members that are available still through the county for free or other private enterprises. So new board members who may not know about all the rules, fiduciary duties that they have once they become a common ownership, board member, that continues. And also a dispute resolution and consumer protection tools.
You said that from Gaithersburg alone, not that many disputes went up to the CCOC level at the county. How many? What numbers are we talking about?
I think it was a dozen to 17.
A year?
Yeah, thereabouts over when it was originally being debated, there were estimates way in excess of that, right? That it would be dwarfing that amount. Now, to be fair, maybe this is a small snapshot, and when we do take it over, we're going to have thousands of complaints. I don't think so. I think you walk around, this city, and most of HOAs are generally well run. There are some HOAs who have problems. So issues with reserves, issues with boards, issues with turnover and expertise that I think education, some of the laws that Neil mentioned that the state's working on. I would also advocate, I think cities should be given a little more authority in terms of being able to manage the issues within their boundaries.
12 to 17 disputes between 2022 and this year. Gaithersburg, almost half its residents live in HOAs, right?
35,000 or so.
And the number of disputes seems to be small, even though the reputation of HOAs is that they are contentious and, they continually fight about the color of windows and the color of doors and the grass height or whatever.
That number reflects how many disputes escalated.
Exactly. So my question is, if you make it easier for them to get dispute resolution through a city mechanism, would that number...
Dispute resolution is the tip of the iceberg. I think the real issue is what happens if there's a serious problem, like something fails and there's not enough reserves. Imagine swimming pools, roofs, other issues. If reserves aren't properly accounted for, somebody's going to be on the hook. It could be the owners. Suddenly you get hit with a $50,000 special assessment. There are a lot of stormwater facilities in the city that are aging and that are under the ownership and control of private communities. And the city has basically volunteered to take over maintenance of those facilities because most homeowners associations don't have the expertise to manage a stormwater facility, and you don't want them failing and causing flooding or whatever issues, pollution problems, so forth.
What do people hate? Their taxes to go up and their HOA dues to go up. And there can be shenanigans. And some shenanigans manifest themselves in, we have this beautiful pavilion. It's going to need to be replaced, and it's going to be, $500,000. What's its useful life? Well, is it 20 years or is it 100 years? Well, if you make the useful life 100 years, what you have to save for it drastically reduces. But everybody knows that thing's not going to last 100 years. So it's an artificial way to monkey with the numbers. What we did at Kentland is you hire third-party engineering reserve-focused firms that do this for a living. I think it's civil engineers that go through your community, identify every asset that you have. They have an up-to-date listing of cost. What is really the cost of that asset? What its replacement cost, its maintenance cost, and most importantly, to Neil's point, create a funding plan So how do you save up for that? So when it's time to replace it, the money is in there and everybody in the community has equitably paid into it. And the nightmare scenario where the members at that time don't get hit with a $50,000 assessment and have to burden the entire cost of an asset that wasn't appropriately reserved for.
The original purpose of homeowners association, in part, was to take some of the pressure off municipal governments and internalize and privatize it in the HOA body. That is the original purpose. You are now suggesting more government regulation, in fact, defeating that original purpose. More reserve studies, more money to conduct elections. Is there a tension there? And where is that balance?
Good question. I think a good analogy for the laissez-faire versus more regulation is look at our banking system, right? And we've had crises throughout the years that now we have better capital controls in terms of capital reserves that our banks need to have after the great financial crisis. And I think you've seen versions of that happen to communities. And it's a little bit of that, like if a huge community was to have a catastrophic, event that they did not reserve for, right? Where is that money going to come? Are the people going to go on the street?
Are you asking for a system of Federal Reserve and Federal Deposit Insurance on behalf of HOAs? That would be like a massive enterprise with huge tax implications.
More akin to the Fed's request that JP Morgan keep X amount of money in their balance sheet.
But the liquidity ratios that you're talking about are set by the Federal Reserve, but they are set by FDIC. There is a huge regulatory mechanism that went into Glass-Steagall, and just the whole system has enormous costs that the financial sector complains about all the time. Both of you, I know, are more free market oriented than regulatory minded. And now you are proposing more regulation for a entire sector that is kind of astounding to me. Where is the balance, though?
I think what we're trying to suggest is that there's a set of rules that have been developed at the state level that make good sense. They just need to be followed. If an HOA does a proper reserve study, then there won't be problems.
With the Kagan bill and with your move to set up a alternate city-based common ownership system, how are you going to address the enforcement issue? The regulation issue, that is clear. But the enforcement issue is still not.
First thing the city manager came back to me with was, what would it take to actually review all of these reserve studies and financial statements? I think it's not as complicated as it sounds. We have couple dozen committees at the city that are generally very effective. Jamil and I both serve on the Economic Development Committee. I think we could set up a volunteer group of people with financial acumen who could eyeball these reports.
You're replacing one volunteer group, which is the HOA board, with another volunteer board, which is the HOA super board at the city.
The difference is the city would have to have a group that has a little bit more experience and expertise.
If you were able to get better outcomes by aggregating, then the county enforcement should have worked, but it doesn't.
One of the CCOC's weakness is its dispute mechanism framework. What I'm referring to, it's the reserve and financial savings framework. So they're different.
How are you going to enforce that the reserve studies are done well, and then if something is wrong, somebody steps in time, not afterwards, but in time to prevent that?
The reserve study for the Kentlands looks a lot different than the reserve study for a 40-unit condominium community. The needs are different. The scale is different. The assets are different. The cost to prepare it is different.
How would your regulation address the size issue?
I would lean towards these third-party reserve companies that are available, size the cost appropriately, just like some governments require nonprofits to have third-party audits before they're eligible to receive grants. A third-party reserve study is a type of an audit of a community and can help ensure that the resident management board that's there is equipped with the information they need to make the decisions about how to save for it.
That is going to cost money on behalf of the HOA.
Yeah, it's already the law, though, Sunil. So the law, the state, you have to have a reserve study every 5 years per Maryland law. What I don't think the law yet requires, and I would advocate for, is you can do that reserve study yourself, meaning as your board, or you can have a third party do it.
I don't disagree with the premise. I'm just looking at the cost of it and whether you are imposing a cost on HOAs that HOAs were designed to escape.
Yeah, it's a balancing act for sure. And it's a fair point. I'll tell you that, I've talked to residents who have been hit with a $15,000 assessment. And I think they would have preferred to have paid $10 a month or a $10 fee to have that reserve study done, so to avoid the $15,000.
But only after the fact, right?
But it's like the fire insurance.
It would make sense to pay $10 a month and avoid the $15,000 special assessment. But if you preemptively put the $10 on, people are going to complain. And until they are faced with a $15,000 special assessment, they're not going to agree to a $10. So it's like it's a fundamental taxation problem.
What I'm envisioning at this point, county's regulation and regulatory body was a little overcomplicated for my taste, which is not that uncommon in government. I think it's as simple as if the city, this imaginary volunteer committee reviews a reserve study or a financial statement and says, there's some issues here that we see. Simply using the bully pulpit and communicating to the members of the community that we think you're in a high risk position here, and that it's your association. You're free to make decisions, but the potential outcome is that somewhere down the road you're going to be faced with a big bill that you're going to have to deal with, and we would suggest that you take action sooner than later.
And I think you start incremental as well, Sunil. So there are things, for example, even if you look at maybe a health score or a health meter in any community, there's simple things that are check the box items. Like, are your reserves kept in cryptocurrency, or are they kept in an FDI insured, safe? You'd be surprised. You laugh, but you'd be surprised of what, you're putting everything in biotech, stocks, or have you done things? Have you assumed an inflation rate of 0% and a return of 50%? There are some general guide rules that, okay, that's out of whack with reality.
Okay, financial literacy and political literacy are about at the same place in our society. Now, Neil, you had this plan where you would have a ladder where the city would somehow arrive at some risk management score by which then you would say you paid this much fee to the Gaithersburg City common ownership system. And if you follow the rules, then you will pay less, like a conditional fee. Do you think that you could design that quite simply so that people did not have to have these huge extra costs, whether it's to run elections or to run reserve studies more regularly?
There, it's a matter of providing the right education and information on how to do it properly. And there are resources. And as Jamil mentioned earlier, the county has some training materials and videos and things like that. But what I found, and this goes back 15 years ago, when I was president of the Kentlands HOA, there's an organization in Northern Virginia called the Community Associations Institute, which is an umbrella organization for common ownership communities nationwide. and they have a vast library of materials.
The Community Association Institute has existed for how long? And have those same HOAs that you are now expecting to buy those books, have they bought them and read them and follow them? I mean, that's the issue.
I suspect that some smaller HOAs aren't aware that these resources exist.
Why would Gaithersburg be able to do it better than Montgomery County?
From my perspective, there's a few things we can do that the county cannot, just by dint of their size. So we're more responsive. We're closer to the residents.
We are in Jefferson versus Hamilton territory at this point. You are making the case that because you're closer to the residents, that you will be more responsive, that the system you create is going to serve better. On the other hand, there is a question about expertise and whether aggregation brings the expertise needed, wondering how you think about that balancing act.
Coming back to your original question, why do we think we can do it better than the county did? I think that the real answer is the county tried it, and we don't think that it was successful. So we need to iterate and come up with a better mechanism, and we'll.
Did you talk to the county leadership about that failure?
Yes, and we met with the leadership of the CCOC as well several times through this process. In fact, the current person who is the manager of the CCOC was the site manager here at the Kentland. So Jamil and I knew him very well. He was extremely effective as the general manager here.
But what happened when he went to the county?
It was shocking a little bit when they came to us for a presentation, and we got the presentation that they gave when we first saw them without any statistics. And we said, go back and tell us how it's actually working. And we basically saw a number of cases that were brought and no actual results. Spectacularly ineffective in our view.
Things at the county are orders of magnitude more complex, where you have a county that is very diverse in housing types, geography, needs, disputes, age of communities, and the rules and authorities that how it was set up, I think maybe not set it up for great success, and their ability to iterate and adapt to that is severely constrained.
So one of the big problems of HOAs is that very few people want to serve in the leadership. And people that are HOA board members tend to continue for long periods of time because nobody else will step up, or in their view, nobody else is stepping up. Or it may be that the people that are there are retired folks that don't have jobs, and so they can do the heavy lift. How do all these reforms address that? I know the Kagan bill talks about elections, but that's kind of the conduct of elections. What about the candidature? What needs to be done there?
Well, that is a very tough question. Here in Kentlands, we've been pretty fortunate, and some of the large HOAs are pretty fortunate in that we have outside management companies that do a lot of the heavy lifting day to day. It's the smaller HOAs where nobody else wants to do it, so they serve as a chairman of the board for the next 20 years. I don't have a solution for that. I mean, you've got to find people in the community and make it less arduous and painful.
Smaller HOAs have different, more acute needs. The larger ones have more resources. So I think whatever solutions we end up fashioning have to take size into account, level expertise, historical performance. I've read this article where some places are researching putting a health grade on the HOA. So when you go to a restaurant, you see the A, B, C.
Who's going to do it?
There, it's the government.
Will the city of Gaithersburg do that?
I'm saying this is what I've been reading, and the way it's communicated is through the real estate transactions. So, you know, when you get a closing package, you see the if your unit has any outstanding violations, you also see reserves. You see like the last 3 months of meeting minutes for the HOA. But now, how about a summary of all that encapsulated into a grade? From what I've read, and I'll share the literature, it can depress the value, right? If you see a big F on it. So, but also creates incentive to improve.
I don't know if government can do that. I mean, you look at all the rating agencies, whether it's credit or it's schools or it's whatever, they're all private and therefore somewhat insulated from political pressure, I would imagine.
Your health inspector is public.
They're not rating in the same way publicly.
It's the analogy that I think brings closer to my mind in terms of there's a list of objective criteria that can maybe be put together and it could be measured against that objective criteria.
Well, I think the issue with getting a private enterprise to create that sort of information database is that the information that they would need to do that is not publicly available generally.
Right.
So developing some, if the city were collecting financial statements and reserve studies, and if those would be available to the general public for prospective residents of those communities, then maybe something like that could be done. But
the Kagan bill does have the requirement that HOAs have independent conduct of elections, which is kind of similar. Have people that are not property managers, that are not on the board, conduct elections. That's, again, a cost. Do you think that small HOAs should be required to have completely independent outside elections? I believe the law says that a unit owner can, under certain circumstances, be considered an independent.
So I think that last point is the key for smaller organizations, is you don't have to hire the League of Women Voters or some other.
Is the League of Women Voters available for hire?
Kentlands has used the League of Women Voters to manage elections in the past.
Here, I would advocate there's been, since the pandemic, a influx of HOA voting software as a service providers that are quite cost effective, tens of dollars to hundreds of dollars for an entire election, depending on the size of the community, that scale up and down appropriately. The software doesn't necessarily address the disinterested party question that you had, but it does address the audit and permanent record and who voted and did it get distributed to every unit owner, and sort of digital auditing capability of it, where you can now run an electronic election, collect the records, and have that there.
So what is interesting is the law does not say which part of the elections need to be conducted by an independent party. The online platforms that you're talking about are purely voting and counting platforms. That's perhaps the easiest thing about elections. You talked about bias, they can address that. There is questions about candidature that cannot be addressed. There's question about nomination. There's a whole range of things that an online platform just cannot do, and therefore it is so cheap. Just the nominating committee and making sure that it functions well is a whole different problem. And the law does not address which part of the elections must be conducted by independent parties.
Yeah, I mean, all the challenges you've outlined are rubber hits road theory to practice. Yeah, the online platforms do not address all that. They do assist in notice in that, assuming your membership database has their emails and communications, they will, appropriately notice people and log if the notices were open, did they reach the people, interacted with them. Yeah, the other challenges you put out are also challenges in the city, frankly, and in the county and in the federal government in terms of it. They're part of our human condition.
Neil Harris, Jamil Hernandez, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Sunil.
Cause I'm in, if it's on, I'm in, can't wait.
That was Gaithersburg City Council members Jamil Hernandez and Neil Harris, who are concerned about the way HOAs and condo associations are managed and want to reform regulations to make sure these organizations don't fail. To do that, they want to set up a new regulatory mechanism within the city of Gaithersburg to train, supervise, and resolve conflicts. As with any regulatory regime, this costs money. Some of that money, perhaps all of it, will come from HOA residents themselves by way of a monthly per unit charge. There are other new costs coming to HOAs as well. Maryland Senator Cheryl Kagan, whose district includes Gaithersburg, sponsored a law to require HOA elections to be conducted by independent third parties. Those HOAs who have property managers may want to use them, but the law specifically says that property managers are not independent third parties. Hernandez and Harris emphasize the importance of reserve studies to make sure that HOAs have a realistic asset amortization and replacement plan and a safe investment plan in the interim. More costs. This sets up a regulation v. cost of regulation debate that is hard to answer in principle. Somewhat easier on the facts. Big HOAs, Hernandez and Harris mentioned Kentlands, are likely to be able to absorb the cost of the new regulations as well as the planning costs. Smaller HOAs, and it is unclear where this threshold is, might not have the same capacity. And because they will not enjoy economies of scale, their per unit extra costs are likely to be higher as well. This is really a classical problem of taxation. Will HOA residents accept a new tax in anticipation that something bad might happen? We pay taxes for national defense. We pay taxes for disaster relief. But we all bristle when tax rates go up. One reason why politics is full of promises to tax the rich, but not the regular person. If something truly disastrous happens, such as a full-on war, you can bet that the taxes you have been paying will not cover the costs. At that time, the government will not only want more of your money, but also your conscription into the military. Call it a special assessment. The current balance between tax and benefits in HOAs is not dissimilar. If something catastrophic happens, there will be a special assessment. But until that happens, residents are not willing to pay more in HOA fees. This is not the wise way, but it is the practical one. Jamil Hernandez and Neil Harris, who are moderate Democrats, fiscally conservative but socially liberal, with emphasis on helping the vulnerable, but also making sure that markets work, are now offering a HOA regulation regime with more tax and more benefits. Will it work? Their argument is that so long as it is the city government, closer to the people, and with more fine-grained knowledge of the problem, they can get it right. We will be watching. That's all for this episode of I Hate Politics, where we aim to stem the decline in local news by working with community voices. Don't forget to tune in to our Tuesday morning news analysis. I Hate Politics is produced by me, Sunil Dasgupta, with support from the University of Maryland, Baltimore County. I direct UMBC's political science program at the universities at Shady Grove in Montgomery County, where, among other things, we explore and learn about politics, government, and society close to home. Music for this episode comes from Silver Spring power pop band, the Airport 77s, Andy Sullivan on guitar, John Kelly on the drums, and Cal Everett on the bass. The songs for this episode come from their new album, Don't Let Go. You can find their music at airport77s.com and at live concerts all over the DC region. If you want to share your music on the show or know someone else who might want to, please email us at producer@ihppod.org. I hope you will subscribe and share the podcast as we bring you stories about politics close to you and to your home. See you next time.
Do you like ice cream? Depends on the time of year. Take it or leave it in February, but summer's almost here. I got a buddy down at Baskin Robbins, maybe he can hook us up. 31 flavors, rainbow jimmies, need a bucket loader, let's hop a city bus, see where it takes us. Wind up never been before. Maybe we can make new friends. Maybe we'll just get lost. Ask our fellow strap hangers where they think we should get off. 'Cause I'm in if it's on.